This is the Brabant Bulletin, brought to you by the European Brabant Registry of America, where people, passion, and preservation are our mission.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I am lucky enough to be here with James and Melissa. They are two members of the EBRA from Connecticut. Well, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the show. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
Let's start out by diving in a little bit about who you are. What brings you to Connecticut?
I grew up in Connecticut, and I grew up with horses at my parents' house. And I went away for school and then came back here and sort of went on to live the statistic of you usually live within 45 minutes of your home, and here we are.
My story is very different. I clearly, from my accent and my name, did not grow up in Connecticut. I'm from Belgium originally, the northern part, right on the Dutch border near Antwerp. Grew up there, went on to study at university, and then did a one-year exchange with a college in Ireland, and that's where I met all my best friends. My housemates were from UMass here in Massachusetts, and continued having a relationship with them. We all went back to our respective countries and continued our lives. But then I moved to the south of France for work, and at some point our company bought a subsidiary in Connecticut, and I thought that was the opportunity to move to the United States. So took it, moved here, and then had the most fortunate ski accident and ripped my knee apart, and Melissa was the one that took care of it, and that's how everything started. Okay. I had always dreamt of, because back then we were living in the what is called the Gold Coast of Connecticut, closer to New York, and neither of us really liked the city. So at some point, after a horse expedition and a whole other story in our lives, we decided that we wanted to move to farm country, Connecticut. And so we moved up here, bought a farm, and that's how the entire horse story here started.
So Melissa, you said that you grew up around horses. What type of horse activities were you into? Any particular breeds?
There were no particular breeds. First, they were just backyard horses, and then my mom loved to take us to places and kind of show us experiences. So she took me one day to Madison Square Garden in New York City, and I saw the National Equitation Finals, which is actually where I would see my trainer win that year. And I decided that that was going to be me, and that's what I would pursue for the next 10 years. And I didn't win the finals, but I did come in the top 10. And that was sort of the launch of my horse career, if you will. And then to this day, I still work for that same farm, training equitation horses and jumpers. But we got into the Brabants after I had a ski accident and hurt my knee. And James was going to be turning 50. And I asked him what he wanted for his birthday, and he announced that he wanted 2 Brabants, which really surprised me because I didn't see that coming. And that was the beginning of our story with the Brabants.
Okay. So James, what about you? Did you have a history in horses, or did that come along with Melissa?
Not at all. I was actually highly allergic to horses when I was a kid, and got allergy treatment for other reasons, but they had included horse dust in that apparently. And so when I met Melissa, I once went, I think, to a horse show with you, and suddenly it dawned on me that I wasn't reacting, and that I was fine around the horses. And then Melissa started teaching me jumping, and had me jumping over 1.40 meters within 6 weeks, I think. So I got the horse bug very late in my life. But the Brabant bug actually came from my family. My mom has always been obsessed with draft horses. She grew up in Antwerp, and when she was young, she could still remember the draft horses being used in the harbor in Antwerp to pull the ships in. So you would have two draft horses on the side of the dock, and the horses would actually literally pull the boat in and then unload the boats. And my dad came from a forester family, and they, before the Second World War, still had two draft horses that they used for logging and pulling the logs out of the woods and bringing them to the sawmills. So there's a history of Brabants in the family, and every time that we would go on hikes and so on with the family in Belgium, you could see that everybody was always obsessed with the draft horses. Like we always had to stop and take pictures, and so when we had this opportunity to get the draft horses ourselves, it was a quick decision.
Yeah. Melissa, had you had any exposure to draft horses?
No, not at all.
You know, obviously these are a very rare breed. How did you go about finding them, and how did you select the horses you did? Tell me a little bit about them.
Yeah, well, it took considerable effort. Luckily, I was laying around in bed and had plenty of time to do it, recovering from my surgery. But yeah, it actually was very difficult. I started looking first on social media, and I think that's how I started actually finding a lot of the individuals that are in the EBRA. And but at the time, especially, there was hardly any available. And I found Rebecca Courtney from All the King's Horses, and kind of realized quickly that that was the only place that was kind of in a reachable distance from where we were at, and likely where they would come from. So I reached out to her, and we started talking, and one thing led to another. And that year we were on her wait list, and our first horse, Addie, popped up. And I usually am very, very deliberate and careful about how I buy horses, but I looked at her and I knew she was the one for me. And so I just sort of said, yeah, I'll take her, sight unseen, which is not how I usually buy horses. But it was the best thing I ever did. She's 1 in a million horse. I've never owned a horse that is so willing and wants to please, and is so wonderful. I actually call her my perfect daughter.
How old is she now, Addie?
She just turned 3.
Okay. And what are your plans for her? Are you going to ride, drive, pleasure?
Yeah, so I've spent a tremendous amount of time ground training them, both of them. And so they really have some advanced ground training skills. And my hope is that I can take all of the ground training skills and kind of transfer it to riding them later on and developing that.
You have 2 of them. Tell me about your second one.
Yeah, Kiki is our second one, and we hadn't intended really on getting 2 at one time. But James, do you remember how I know we were in the car in Maine driving when I went on my phone, and she had somehow come up. I think she had been sold to someone else, and it didn't work out. And it actually was James's birthday, and she was born on
my birthday.
Really?
Which was an omen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so yeah, we kind of bought her the same way. I think Rebecca is a very special person, and I knew I could trust her in terms of what we were getting after many conversations with her. So we bought her sight unseen. So the first time we saw them was when they arrived on the trailer here at the farm, and they got unloaded, and that was that. They really are both perfect.
So Kiki is your husband horse, James?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you envision her being your riding horse as well?
If she wants to, yeah. Kiki has a little bit more of a will of her own than Addie does, and has been a little bit tougher to train. But she's an amazing horse. I feel like maybe she responds a little bit more to me than to you.
That's because you're always the big guy and I'm the bad guy.
True.
You're the treat dispenser and
No, but Kiki is obsessed with food, more than any horse an animal that I've ever seen, and so anything that needs to happen around dinner time or feed time does not happen, and yeah, she's a little bit harder to train.
yeah. So can you give me a little brief description of each, Addie and Kiki?
So Kiki is nearly purebred. She's 95% Brabant.
She's 94%.
94%.
So Kiki is actually really interesting. She is a mix of Dean's favorite, I think, workhorse. Birch is always the one that is in all his logging videos, and she's an amazing horse. And when we were looking at all the mares at Rebecca and Dean's, she's always the one that pops out to be the most Belgian, maybe, in looks. And so we knew that Kiki probably, in combination with Ash, would grow into what she turned out to be. She actually has a really interesting pedigree because I started looking at her ancestry, and so Birch actually came from Utah, I think, or somewhere from the west, but her grandfather is actually from Belgium and from a town very near where I grew up in Belgium. Oh. And she's actually from the stable. Her grandfather is from the stable where the judge from the show last year that you organized, what is her name? Professor Colsus, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's her stable. The ancestry goes all the way back to them, and then so yeah, that we thought was very special.
That's awesome.
She also turned out to be a very special color, which is not that common.
Yeah, she's actually a bay with the black mane and the true bay, which I don't think is that common in Brabant.
Yeah, especially on the purebred. You don't see a lot of them.
Yep. And then Addie is 50%. Her dad is Ash of Rebecca and Dee and Courtney. And her mom is a grade. We're not exactly sure what she is. I suspect maybe a Percheron. Addie definitely has a little more pep and energy and get up and go than Kiki does. Kiki's worst enemy is moving.
But then Addie is a lot taller and more slender. Yeah, she's a stunning horse.
Yeah, a little bit more athletic. So you've got more of a linebacker and then a quarterback.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talked about your roots in Belgium, James, and you and Melissa had a nice trip to Europe this year. Can you talk to me a little bit about your trip back home and what you saw and experienced?
Well, I think in the last 2 years, we've tried to build in more and more horse stuff. I'm not sure the kids like it that much, but they go along with us. Last year, when we went back to Belgium, we actually went for a draft horse ride, a Brabant ride on the beach in Holland, which was insanely cool. And this year, the goal was to on our last day of vacation actually to go see the year market in Vilvoorde, which is the event where the certification of the stallions happens. And but I'd never been in my life, so it was kind of a surprise for us. The day before that, we'll start with that. We ended up visiting the museum of the draft horse in Wollezele, which is kind of in Belgium the center of the Brabant universe. Very interesting museum. I think we learned a lot. It's a tiny museum, but once we told them about where we're from and everything, and that we had our own draft horses in the US, suddenly people started talking to us, and we went on a horse ride or a carriage ride there, and it was really cool, very informative.
Just by chance, we actually ended up there on National Heritage Day.
True.
Oh, wow.
Which was really special because there was a lot of extra people there and experiences,
Yep.
Which I think actually is why we got access to speaking to so many people and getting so much information.
Mm.
Yep.
What
And
did you suss out? What did you glean? Anything you'd like to share?
Sure. After talking to someone, they actually called a lady that was from one of the organizations that keeps track of the stud books, and so we were able to speak to her. And so they think that there's about 700 horses on the stud book, but the challenge is that there's more than one organization. In Belgium, there's actually 3, I think, correct?
Yeah.
And there's
as everything in Belgium, there's a Flemish, a Walloon, and a Royal National organization.
And amongst the 3 organizations, I think there's some level of disagreement or lack of consensus about breeding standards and what they're trying to achieve. So this is how you get sort of 3 organizations, each maintaining their own books. But it was interesting because they discussed how Belgium has started a program trying to preserve and develop the breed. So the government is actually subsidizing the breeding programs to try and get more Brabants.
I think it's 200 live foals in order to preserve the breed, and there's only 70 being born every year.
You said 70 as in 70?
I think that was the numbers. We wrote them down somewhere.
Yeah.
It definitely wasn't enough to keep the breed up.
Which is why the subsidies started. And then interestingly enough, there's a beer in Belgium called Palm. And their icon is a Brabant. And they have also added on to the subsidy. But what they do is Palm pays for the horses that are, what color is that? They basically have a white mane and almost a lighter palomino sort of color.
Yeah, the sorrel with flaxen mane and tail.
Exactly.
It's more the Flemish draft horse.
Yeah, the Flemish stuff. Yeah.
And so if you happen to get one of that color, there's a substantial increase in the amount of money you get in trying to promote that lineage as well.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the cool anecdotes that you heard from some of the breeders and handlers?
Well, in the museum, one of the things, but that's maybe the darker history of the draft horse is then being used in the coal mines in Belgium. And so these horses, well, they probably never knew any better. As foals, they were lowered into the coal mines and they lived their lives in the dark in the coal mines their entire lives as draft horses pulling the carts. But so they had the actual elevator shafts that they used to lower the horses in the mines there in the museum. Just maybe a little bit darker history.
That's interesting. So from the time they're weaned, they live in the mines?
Yep.
Wow.
That harness was a giant contraption that was sort of applied kind of how you would imagine a regular harness, except around their buttocks, that it was much thicker and bigger because the device sort of rotated them upwards. So they went down by their buttocks first with their heads up down the shaft. And so this harness that held them together sort of had straps to hold them in that position, but also sort of keep their legs in as they were lowered down into the shaft.
So that must have been quite narrow, even like to lower a weanling and having to put them vertical down a shaft.
Yeah, I think so.
That's sad. And so once they go down, they never come up.
No, yeah, it was sad. We were rather surprised by it. I think that's the most surprising thing we saw in the museum.
That makes me kind of weepy, actually, that they
Yeah,
never got to see the light of day past.
Our kids were a little bit taken aback by it too.
Obviously we as human beings have utilized and exploited horsepower for a number of reasons for one tool or another. And of course, mining is part of that. It's just hard to imagine an animal's lifespan without seeing daylight.
Sure.
Past their first 6 months of life. That's incredibly
Yep.
it's incredibly powerful to know just, the dedication that these horses gave to us.
Yep.
So
On the brighter side, there's obviously a lot of positive ways that the horses have been used. The Antwerp harbor horses is one of them. Shrimp fishing is something that nobody can imagine anymore. I think actually 3 years ago when we went to Belgium, that was our horse experiences, that we went for a morning with a shrimp fisher on the coast. And the stories that you hear from them are incredible too. They're trying to keep that alive too. It's now part of the UNESCO World Heritage, is the shrimp fishing with the horses in Belgium. But
and I heard it takes years as an understudy and apprentice before you actually because you have to go through a certification, right, to be a equine shrimp fisher.
Yep.
yes.
And they're trying to keep that alive too, but obviously there's more modern ways of doing shrimp fishing now. But it's stunning to see it in action, having horses walk through the ocean, and yeah, it's very cool to see.
I live in the low country of the United States, which is coastal South Carolina. And a part of me was thinking, shrimping is a huge industry here. Wouldn't it be kind of cool to have some of the folks from, Belgium come over and teach some of our draft horse owners how to shrimp with horses here on our coasts.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Do they shrimp like right on the coast, or is it like deeper out in the water?
I've seen trawlers right off the beaches. Granted, I don't know how deep the slope. I've never ventured out that far.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. I guess I would have to do some additional research, but it would be kind of fun. I know that we have annual equine rides where the beaches are open up to horses. It's not every day, but there are certain times of the year where we can get out there. It would be fun to incorporate some of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an amazing experience, that beach ride. We suddenly learned that draft horses can run too.
Yes. We went on the beach ride. It really was extraordinary. We thought we were going with like a handful of Brabants, like maybe 5 or 6, but instead when we arrived, we went with 14 of them. And I couldn't figure out how we were going to get 14 Brabants in a horse trailer, because I can't get my own 2 in a horse trailer here. So I was so excited to see what would happen. And so he actually has a converted flower truck, and it's a double tractor trailer that exactly as you would imagine here, that he had modified. And so it's 2 tractor trailers connected, and he parks it sort of at a 90-degree angle. And has some custom ramps that open up out of the back. And then he's made all these dividers inside, and 7 Brabants went into each part of the trailer. And then we drove this monster double tractor trailer to the beach with all 14 Brabants. And then you unload them all, and he has a system of tying them to the outside of both the trailers. And you tack your horse up, and off we went with 14 of them. But the power of riding them all on the beach together and in the water was it was honestly just magical. And at some point he said, all right, well, you can just gallop, and the horses know the routine. And to have 14 of them just take off galloping was kind of like a thunderstorm, and the power was unbelievable. I'm really glad that we all knew how to ride really well, because you literally were just along for the ride as we galloped down the beach, and it was really incredible.
That had to be quite the sound too, of the dinner plate hooves just banging on the hard deck of the sand. That had to be great.
Yeah, it really was absolutely incredible. And for anyone that thinks that a Brabant can't move, it's not true. They can move very, very fast when they want to. I think that's actually the fastest I've ever gone on a horse. It was a full out gallop, arguably uncontrolled at times.
I know, like when it's breakfast and dinner, as you know, our horses are very food motivated. If my horses are on the very far end of the pasture, it's so incredible to just watch them gallop at full speed. Because as you say, they're spending most of their days head down, eating in a sedentary sort of way. But to see them come to life and, look like horses, albeit for a sprint down the pasture, it's pretty incredible to see.
It is, absolutely.
It's actually one of my favorite moments of the day is when the horses are in the back paddocks, and those are kind of downhill for us, so we can see everything from the barn. And I've never seen horses react to voice commands, but we can actually call the horses and they come back from all the way back, and then you see them running all the way through the paddocks back to us. It's really cool to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm.
So is there anything that you picked up from your time at the museum about the history you thought was interesting, or any other story that you heard while you were at the museum?
It was really cool. There was an older vet that was because of the Belgian heritage. There was people there showing off some things, and they had all the tools from way back when, including the what looked like hedge clompers to dock the tails of the horses.
Oh, rough.
Which now they don't do anymore. But it used to be common.
It was really interesting because there were two older gentlemen well into their 80s that were all very well versed in these old tools. A lot of them were dental tools, but I think my favorite one, which I'm not sure we should still have it today. It's a bit that kind of looks like a pelham, but the inside of the bit is hollow, and in the middle of the mouth there's a hole. And on the side of the bit, it kind of turns, and it's sort of like a little funnel on the outside. And so you put medication that they need into the funnel, and it goes down through the bit and then out through the hole, which I think is a great way to be able to give them some medication. I don't know if it worked as well as it appears, but I thought that was one of the most novel, interesting things that they had. I've never seen that before.
That's kind of interesting. Kind of like a speculum in the mouth, and then you just put the medication through the side.
Yeah, essentially, pretty much. Yep. Yeah.
Not to switch subjects, but it was the day after we went to the museum. We went to the year market in Vilvoorde, and we were there before they started doing the certifications, and we were talking to somebody there. And he was saying that he was actually in the process of importing a Flemish draft horse back from the United States, because they have gone mostly extinct in Belgium now. And so they're starting to actually bring back Flemish draft horses, which I guess resemble a little bit the Amish Belgians.
Yeah, the American Belgians. Yeah,
the American Belgians, but they're bringing them back just because we don't have them in Belgium anymore.
Yeah, he was actually referring to the American Belgians that the Amish have, which obviously gets confusing, but they're trying to reintegrate that breed back into Europe because it's been lost. And we found that very interesting, because I feel like that's a horse that's been developed that's very specific for here in our use in America.
Mhm.
But that's important to them and something they're starting to do. I think something that's interesting is when you look at all of this and sort of all the niches and places it's gone, I feel like people are breeding for practical uses and what they're trying to do with the animals specifically. That's kind of noticeable over time in Europe, and then you can see how the various developments have gone here in the US in terms of the more Belgian Amish style draft horse versus the Brabant. And I've also listened and seen some videos about why a lot of people use, for example, half crosses of the Brabants, just because they have a little more pep and zip, but they still have that sedate, calm demeanor and behavior. And we see that in our own horses. With Kiki is more purebred at 95%, and she is a lot more sedate and doesn't have that much pep or zip, versus Addie is a 50%, and she has a lot more of that. So I think it depends what you're trying to do with the animal, whether you need those qualities or not. When you look over history, I feel like that's what people were breeding for. They're breeding for work in the fields, or whether they were putting them down in the coal mines, or what they were trying to do with them, I feel like drives a little bit of how they were developing them.
But I think it's also a little bit the demise of the horse in Belgium right now, is that all those practical uses are disappearing, and that maybe one of the things that struck me when we were at the museum and then we did the carriage ride. First of all, we thought we were going for a 5-minute carriage ride around the block in Vollezeel, and it turned out that it was planned as a 1-hour tour of the region, which is beautiful around there. But then they drove past all the former big draft horse barns around Vollezeel, and they're all shut down. Like they all have plaques of, here was the stud barn of this and this, but none of them have horses anymore, and that's I think very well, also a little bit sad, but very visible that entire industry and all the activity around Vollezeel is disappearing just because there's no more use for the horses, or except for heritage and shows.
Well, it makes me wonder that with their efforts of preservation and incentivizing the breeding of these horses, why they wouldn't reopen the old stud farms.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is expense driven. The one major one we went by is now a bed and breakfast and a hotel.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
And so, I mean, just like the farms here, it's so expensive to keep them open, and the overhead. And so unless you're doing something specific with the horses, I think it's difficult.
So do you plan to breed your 2 mares, or will they remain pleasure horses?
It's a good question.
It is a good question. We hadn't intended to, but the more we learn about this and the deeper we get into it, and we understand the numbers and how there's not enough bulls being born every year in order to keep the breed going, I'd say it's not out of the question now. They're still young. It wasn't originally in our plans, but it could be interesting to do, possibly.
Yeah. Is there anything that I haven't asked, or that you would like to share and dive into?
Well, I think so I touched on it. The experience, the last era of vacation of the year market in Vilvoorde was pretty impressive, because I thought it would be like half an hour of a few draft horses getting shown on the market square. It turns out to be an all-day event. The horse certification itself is done by age group. So they started with the little babies and then worked their way up by year. 1, 2, 3, 4. up with all the mares and the stallions separated on top of it. So it took a lot of time. Funnily enough, Professor Goossens, who did our show last year, was actually one of the judges at the certification. So we recognized her from far away, but that was really cool to see. Also shows how small the draft horse world is, I think. But to see the event itself, and so you have the certification, but then next to it, there's a ring where they do driving competition with the draft horses, where they have to go through obstacles, and then there's a third ring where they do specific judging again, and that's just for the horses. There's an entire cow, sheep, and whatever section to the year market too. But it takes over the city of Vilvoorde that year market, and it's really impressive to see the audience and so on. I assume that a lot of people come for the rides and the whatever fair happens next to it, but there's still a big tradition around it. They had hoofsmiths there that were doing live presentations of how they were putting hoof irons on a draft horse, and like a lot going on. But it's nice to see that tradition still lives and that they continue to push for it, and then people come from far away to actually see it happening.
Is that like our state fairs here in the US?
Similar, yes, but it's all Brabant focused. It was only the Brabant that was there. It was not any other breed. And I think for all the Brabant lovers out there, I would encourage anyone to go and see it in person, because it really is an extraordinary sort of cultural experience with the horses, but the atmosphere, and to see what's going on amongst the judges and how they're judging the horses. And it's done in an atmosphere that's completely different than here in the States. It literally is on the town square. It's just a little brick area surrounded by benches that otherwise people would just be sitting at and talking. But to see the horses brought there, to see the judges interact, and how they're judging the horses, and going through it all is remarkable, and how the horses are handled. It's very different culture and experience than how things are done here.
Now, were they speaking Dutch or were they speaking French?
So that's borderline.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you said it was like right in the.
Yeah, like everything in Belgium, it's always a little bit contentious. Vilvoorde is very close to Brussels. It's right next to it. And so the majority, I would say, would probably be Dutch speaking there. But then there's a very big French contingent too. So you kind of have to do both in Belgium.
Melissa, how's your Dutch? How's your French?
My Dutch is very poor, and my French is just slightly better than my Dutch.
Did James, did you have to do a lot of translation for her?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
People speak English though.
Yeah.
So when you go to the
okay, I was gonna say, how did the horse conformation stuff translate? Like how does the
well, obviously the judging is not done in English, but if ever you have like questions, and that's why I totally agree with Melissa, like if you ever have a chance to see that year mark, the people are very open. You can just talk to everybody, not while they're being judged, but like in the area, there's a market square next to the big one where all the preparations happen, and people are extremely willing to just talk and hear stories. They thought it was very interesting when we said that we had draft horses in America, because then everybody immediately thinks of the American Belgians, the Amish ones, and so when we told them, no, we have the real Belgian ones, the imported Brabants, then people get talking, and it's a very cool atmosphere.
So did you learn any breeding skills or grooming skills?
Well, actually, it was great. I even though your videos and your presentation is outstanding, I've struggled with the braiding, and I did get to see them doing that live, and that was great. and how they were doing their tails and what they did with the raffia. So that was pretty fun. And I was very intrigued because I continue to struggle about transporting our Brabants around here. And a lot of them have brought their Brabants with a tractor and a massive tractor from the field, and this sort of livestock trailer that they pull behind it, and all the horses just line up in there, and they drive this giant tractor with this modified trailer into the middle of the city. I think that was remarkable. Yeah.
It's pretty great too to see all the horses lined up and no fighting happening either, relatively.
Yeah, no, I mean, the demeanor of the Brabants is so kind and easygoing and laid back. I've never worked with another horse that has those qualities. And yeah, no, nobody was fighting or getting upset. I mean, they'd have them. That's the interesting thing there. They line them up literally nearly touching each other. Versus here in the States, you have to make sure you're respecting everyone's giant space, and especially when you line up in the show ring. But there they actually push them together, and they, sometimes there was 20 of them lined up literally hip to hip. And then somewhere in that lineup, there'd be a foal crammed in there with its mom or or whatever. And that was really beautiful as well. When they trot them, the foals would just sort of be lingering behind or go along with them.
Yeah.
And that was really beautiful to see.
That's spectacular.
Yeah.
Well, James and Melissa, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Gosh, it was a treat. And I look forward to hearing about future trips, breeding plans, all of the above. And for anybody who may be in the Connecticut area, are they able to reach out to you? Can they visit, see your horses?
Of course,
always.
absolutely, yes.
Where can they find you? Do you have a Facebook page or website?
No, we don't actually have a Facebook page, but you can certainly email me at Pelton, PELTONM, like Melissa, C, like cat, at yahoo.com. And I'm sure we can figure something out.
Wonderful. I will be sure, everybody listening, to put that in the show notes so you can track James and Melissa down and go see these two beautiful mares.
Awesome.
Thank
All right,
you.
everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And don't forget, to ride a Brabant is to fly without wings.